The story of the American presidency is not merely a list of names etched in marble. It is the biography of a nation constantly reinventing itself. It is a story of power, peril, and the relentless pursuit of a more perfect union. It begins in the late 18th century, in a world dominated by kings and emperors, where the very idea of a democratically elected executive was a radical, dangerous experiment. When the cannon smoke of the revolution cleared, the young republic turned to one man. George Washington did not seize power, he accepted it with a heavy heart. Standing on the balcony of Federal Hall in 1789, he was keenly aware that he was walking on untrodden ground. Every decision he made set a precedent. He established the cabinet, asserted executive privilege, and perhaps most importantly, he taught the world how to say goodbye. By stepping down after 2 terms, Washington proved that the office belonged to the people, not the person. His successor, John Adams, struggled to fill those titanic shoes, but he ensured the survival of the fragile government. Then came the age of the philosopher-king, Thomas Jefferson, a man of contradictions, a champion of liberty who enslaved others. Jefferson nevertheless transformed the map of the continent. With a stroke of a pen in 1803, the Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the United States. The American gaze turned west. The era of the Founding Fathers culminated with James Madison and James Monroe, who solidified American sovereignty against foreign powers. The era of good feelings was fleeting, however, as the nation began to fracture. By 1829, the presidency shifted from the Virginia aristocracy to the rough-and-tumble frontier. Andrew Jackson, the hero of New Orleans, stormed the White House. He was the first outsider, a populist who opened the White House to the public, literally, and waged war against the financial elite. Yet, his legacy is forever stained by the Trail of Tears and the brutal removal of indigenous peoples. Jackson proved the presidency could be a weapon of sheer will. In the decades that followed, the nation expanded relentlessly under men like James K. Polk, who fulfilled the prophecy of manifest destiny, pushing the borders to the Pacific Ocean. But with every new territory came the poisonous question: would it be free? Or would it be slave? Mediocre leadership in the 1850s, men like Franklin Pierce and James Buchanan, failed to stop the bleeding. They watched, paralyzed, as the fabric of the Union tore apart. The stage was set for the greatest trial the nation would ever face. In 1861, a tall, melancholy lawyer from Illinois arrived in Washington under the cover of night. Fearing assassination, Abraham Lincoln inherited a windstorm. He did not fight to conquer the South, but to save the Constitution. Lincoln's genius lay in his evolution. He began the war to preserve the Union, but he finished it to define human freedom. The Emancipation Proclamation and the Gettysburg Address refounded America, changing the United States from a plural noun. These United States are, to a singular one, the United States is. His assassination, just as victory was secured, canonized him as the secular saint of democracy. The aftermath of the Civil War was messy. Andrew Johnson barely survived impeachment, and Ulysses S. Grant, a brilliant general, found the presidency a quagmire of corruption. As the 19th century waned, the U.S. roared into the Industrial Revolution. It was the Gilded Age, a time of robber barons and steel magnates. Presidents like Grover Cleveland fought to restore integrity. Cleveland remains a historical curiosity as the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms in the 19th century, a feat that wouldn't be repeated for over 130 years. He left the White House, only to return 4 years later, proving that in American politics, there is always a second act. The 20th century arrived with a gunshot, assassinating William McKinley and thrusting a force of nature into the Oval Office, Theodore Roosevelt. TR was pure kinetic energy. He busted monopolies, preserved the American wilderness in glorious national parks, and dug the Panama Canal. He believed the U.S. should speak softly and carry a big stick. He transformed the presidency into a bully pulpit, using the media to bypass Congress and speak directly to the people. His rival in influence was the scholarly Woodrow Wilson, who took America onto the global stage during World War I. Wilson dreamed of a League of Nations, a world governed by law rather than force. Though his dream failed in his lifetime, it planted the seeds for the international order. But the high idealism of the progressive era crashed into the reality of the Roaring Twenties. Ending in the catastrophe of the Great Depression, the stock market collapsed, and with it, the American spirit. In the depth of despair, Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, offered the nation a New Deal. Paralyzed by polio, FDR possessed a buoyancy that lifted a frightened country. He reinvented the government's role in the lives of citizens, creating social safety nets that exist to this day. When World War II erupted, he became the architect of the Allied victory, transforming the U.S. into the arsenal of democracy. He remains the only president to be elected 4 times, dying in office as the architect of the modern world. The mantle fell to Harry S. Truman, a plain-spoken man who faced the most difficult decision in human history, the use of the atomic bomb. Truman ended the Hot War and built the architecture to fight the Cold War. Containing Soviet expansionism, stability returned with Dwight D. Eisenhower. Ike, the supreme Allied commander, built the interstate highway system and warned against the military-industrial complex, presiding over a decade of economic boom and suburban expansion. The 1960s began with the torch being passed to a new generation. John F. Kennedy, JFK, brought youth, glamour, and the terrifying brinksmanship of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He challenged the nation to go to the moon, not because it was easy, but because it was hard. His assassination in Dallas broke the nation's heart. Lyndon B. Johnson, LBJ, a master legislator, channeled that grief into the Great Society. He bullied and charmed Congress into passing the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, fundamentally changing the social structure of America. Yet, his legacy was swallowed by the quagmire of the Vietnam War. Then came the tragic figure of Richard Nixon, a brilliant geopolitical strategist who opened relations with Communist China. Nixon was undone by his own paranoia. The Watergate scandal shattered the public's trust in the presidency, forcing the first and only presidential resignation in history. The late 70s saw Jimmy Carter, a moral man in an immoral time, struggle with economic stagnation and the Iran hostage crisis, paving the way for a conservative revolution. Ronald Reagan swept into power promising "morning in America." An actor turned politician, he was the great communicator. He slashed taxes, deregulated the economy, and challenged the Soviet Union to tear down this wall. His partnership with Mikhail Gorbachev helped bring a peaceful end to the Cold War. leaving the U.S. as the world's sole superpower. His vice president, George H.W. Bush, skillfully managed the collapse of the Soviet Union and the First Gulf War but lost his re-election to a charismatic governor from Arkansas. Bill Clinton presided over the peace and prosperity of the 1990s. It was the dawn of the Internet age. Clinton moved the Democratic Party to the center, overseeing a budget surplus and economic boom. Though his presidency was marred by personal scandal and impeachment proceedings, which he survived. The new millennium shattered American complacency on September 11, 2001. George W. Bush transformed into a wartime president, launching the War on Terror and invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. His presidency defined the security state of the modern era. In 2008, the pendulum swung toward history. Barack Obama became the first African American president. Campaigning on hope and change, he navigated the Great Recession, saved the auto industry, and passed the Affordable Care Act. His election proved that the American story was one of constant widening of the circle of inclusion. But history is a dialectic. The reaction to the establishment brought Donald Trump to power in 2016. A billionaire businessman and reality TV star, Trump upended every norm of the office. He pursued an America First agenda, renegotiated trade deals, and appointed conservative judges. His style was combative, utilizing social media to bypass traditional filters, deepening the political polarization of the country. The 2020 election took place in the shadow of a global pandemic. Joe Biden, a veteran of the Senate, defeated Trump, promising a return to normalcy and a focus on rebuilding the middle class and infrastructure. His term saw significant legislative achievements in climate and industry but struggled with inflation and geopolitical instability. However, the story had a twist that echoed back to the 19th century. In 2024, Donald Trump achieved what only Grover Cleveland had done before him: a return to power after a defeat. Winning a second, non-consecutive term, Trump's re-election signaled a profound shift in the American electorate and a rejection of the status quo, launching the nation into uncharted waters as it approached its 250th anniversary. From Washington's horse-drawn carriage to the majestic Air Force One, the American presidency has remained the focal point of the nation's identity. It is an office that has broken men, and yet has been the vessel for the greatest achievements of the modern age. As we look back at these 45 individuals, some heroes, some villains, most somewhere in between, we see the reflection of the American people themselves: ambitious, flawed, resilient, and always moving forward.